Okay. Credit card tab hits $1 trillion. So for the first time since, let's just say 2000, and highest amount since January of 2009, data from the Fed is showing that consumers here in the United States owe a little over $1 trillion on their credit card bills. This is up 6.2% from a year ago. What's one positive way you think it is to look at this data and digest it? Especially if you are an economist. What's one way you might look at it?
People are spending money.
People are spending money. So again, following what came out of the 2008 financial crisis, we seemed to be more resistance to accumulation of debt. And in fact, debt levels for many started to decrease. Many on the individual as well as the institutional side started to see them trim debt. But again, ever since January of 2009, we start to see the debt levels start to ratchet back up. And now we have hit an all-time high.
If you're saying that consumers are spending, but they're spending money that doesn't really belong to them. I mean, it's more of like, well, you know, like credit. They're putting things on credit, so technically they aren't really spending their money. They're spending what would be considered. But to me, I mean, I'm looking at it as they're spending money that doesn't really belong to them.
Spending money that doesn't really belong to them. That is true. So one tool that you might want to look at is what is delinquency rates. You know, if I were the economist and I was viewing this, before I viewed this as positive data, I first want to know what had happened to delinquency rates. Are people late in paying those credit card bills? Now, just because they're paying by credit card, if delinquency rates are very low and default rates are very low, again, we tend to view that more as a positive. But if we are seeing an increase in default rates, an increase in late payments or delinquencies, while at the same time, and you would expect those two to be correlated, we're going to explain some of these terms later, but probably somewhat of a linear relationship between them. As one increases, we're going to see the other one directly increase. And that's kind of where we have right now. We've seen defaults start to increase with this. But at the $1 trillion mark, there's some other debt levels that are up there already. What do you think the #1 debt for households in America are?
Mortgage.
Mortgages. I challenge you to look for number 2 and 3 because that mantle got passed, I do believe, sometime last year.
Would it be student loans?
It would be interesting to look. Student loans are going to be up there and auto loans. Now, for the longest time, we had mortgages and we had auto loans. But let's see what happens. Do your homework and put on your investigative hats and see what the part of the story I'm leaving out and what those have turned. Okay. This is week 6, and we are going to talk about what? Cost volume profit analysis, or simply stated CVP. All right, now let's look at an example here. There's our captain. All right, we're going to call this a company Sinking cruises. Interesting name for a cruise company. So this is my best rendition of a boat sailing on the water, and here becomes our captain. All right, so Sinking Cruises is in the business of providing Mediterranean cruises around the coast. Before they ever set sail, what are some costs that they're going to incur?
I would say like fuel, maintenance, oh my, getting too detailed.
Okay, so we could call this
Materials they need for, and I mean, it's a cruise ship, so.
we're going to fill in this gap. You're right. They're going to incur some costs such as fuel, the acquisition of the boat, the folks who are required to work both on the ship and back in the office prior to the boat ever taking sail. Insurance cost, advertising, general business. Okay, so just frame it up here. These costs are going to incur. Now, somewhere out in here, if we are to turn a profit, and more importantly, what do you think the chief objective of Sinking Cruises? What is their chief objective? To maximize profit. So if they are to maximize profit, the first revenues that they are receiving are going to have to go in order to cover those fixed costs. We're going to introduce a term, which will kind of be somewhere out here, that we would call this our break-even point. Okay, so how does all this tie into cost volume profit analysis? What can CBP tell us? How much does income increase if we install a new machine to reduce labor cost? Okay, right now conversations going over AI, artificial intelligence, and the phasing out of jobs. Specifically look within the bank tellers. Okay, what kind of efficiencies do we expect to gain if, bless you, if we install some new technology that reduces labor costs? Bless you. What's the change in income if selling prices decline, but sales volume increases? How much will income change if we change the sales? Don't you get this again.
I thought it was two. Sorry.
Mixed. All right. So if we see a change in the sales mix, what will that do to income? More importantly, when we talk about break even, what level of income must we generate in order to break even? Remember, in this example, anything less than break even, we're recording what? A loss. All right, so let's look at some fixed costs. We said labor, insurance. By this definition, what does fixed cost, what do these fixed costs have in common?
It says the same.
They stay the same. Despite variations in activity, they are not going to change. Okay, so we'll look at this level, and if we'll call this activity and call this revenue. And we're going to start drawing a line like this. Okay, now, remember, as activity is increased, revenue is also going to increase. But out of the gate, we're operating at a loss. If this is our break-even point, we'll take this all the way up to there. Anything up to this point, I'll mark that as break-even. Anything up to this point of activity, any revenue associated with this point of activity, we're going to call that a loss. All right, opposite of fixed cost, what do we have?
Variable.
Variable cost. So over here we talked about costs. Okay, what's a variable cost?
Materials. Something that changes based on productivity.
Changes in
Oh, speak up. Let folks in Kansas hear you.
She's in Green Bay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Wisconsin. Our Kansas class is empty, classroom is empty, so.
Change in proportion to changes in volume of activity.
Changes with the changes in relation to changes in activity. Is that what we're saying?
Yep.
All right, give me an example of a variable cost.
Materials.
Materials. Let's apply this to sinking cruises. What would be a variable cost for sinking cruises?
Food.
Food served on the boat.
Mm-hmm. Labor.
Labor. What's it take to move that boat?
Fuel.
Fuel. Okay. We'll add a third cost in here, which we'll call a mixed cost. So mixed cost is neither fixed or variable. In fact, it's going to include some component of both. Okay, for instance, let's say our booking manager for sinking cruises. Let's say we pay this individual both a salary as well as a commission. Salary is going to represent the fixed cost component, commissions representing the variable cost. Okay, now, a stepwise chart. What's a stepwise chart?
It reflects a step pattern from the costs.
It does what?
Reflects a step pattern in costs.
Reflects a step pattern in cost. Okay, here, let's look at salaries. Let's go back to this booking manager and say we want to use their salary. Okay, often when we look at production supervisors or production managers, those that we're going to compensate this way, we see a stepwise manner in which their sales are fixed within a relevant range. If production expands significantly, additional supervisors must be hired. Okay, so in your book, I want you to look at the stepwise chart. And here we're going to say Again, a nice little example of, call it volume and revenue. Okay, so let's show and let's just look at some various income limits. All right, so when we have a pattern, it's going to start out like this. So what's this telling me? The first stepwise cost so we're going to see that as activity is increasing up to this point, what must we do at this point? What would we do at that point?
That's multitasking. Obviously not one.
No, so what do you think if we're maximizing?
Well, I was gonna say, usually, like, if you're, like, when you're talking about volume, if you're talking about materials and merchandise and things like that, then you're gonna be hiring more
Okay, so at this point, you're correct. I'm going to have to hire, I have produced, that person has produced their maximum output. At this point, I'm going to have to step up, and this is going to be the addition of added workers, added people within this same role. If we're focusing on one person's job, once you have a booking manager that has hit this point, within this range, and this is what we're going to call a relevant range, we're going to have to add an additional worker. Okay, now what happens when we compensate them? And it would probably help if I labeled this right. I'm used to thinking of that. Let's call this cost. When we add that additional worker, we see an increase in cost. We're able to operate, again, under one additional cost, I can operate up to, and I'm just assigning some numbers, but up to this point.
So you can, like, increase the cost of your products, or?
Well, I'm increasing right now my cost to compensate this person. Now, once I hire an additional worker, I'm able to maintain that through this relevant range. So my cost activity should increase up to a certain point until I find the need to hire an additional worker. This is what our stepwise chart is going to show us. All right. Measuring cost behavior. Flip over to that section in the text. I guess Sinking Cruises is closed.
A name like that, they didn't stay in shape.
They went under.
Well, when I was watching the last time I taught this class, I used an airline. And the name of the airline was Crash Airlines.
Oh.
So I had to come up with another. I didn't want to use the same company name. So we had to come up with some different different things. All right, measuring cost behavior. What's our objective going to be? Measuring cost behavior. So our objective, we're going to say, is to classify all cost as either fixed or variable. And to do this, we're going to look at 3 methods. All right, the first one that we're going to look at, scatter plot.
High-low.
What's a scatter plot?
Displays past cost and unit data in a graph.
Displays cost data points on a graph. Okay, it's always helpful, most always helpful. Here's the economist in me. Notice I say most always. We're not going to speak in definitive terms, but it's almost always helpful to plot cost data to be able to visualize the relationship between cost and activity. All right, so a scatter diagram. First, how do I do it right here? We'll call it cost and volume. And we are going to say that, I'm going to assign some. Okay, it's often said that a graph can speak, I don't know, 1,000 words, we'll say many words. But using this example, do we see any type of pattern?
It's increasing.
It is increasing. As our volume or activity increases, we also see our cost increasing. So we recognize some pattern that is going on. In fact, you know, if you start here, I'm doing my best to draw a straight line that would most evenly pass through each of those data points. I can first call this my estimate cost line. So what I have done is try to draw my line through touching all those data points. All right, now this is drawn to reflect some pattern between cost and volume. Item 2. The high-low method. What's the high-low method going to tell us?
Estimate the cost equation using 2 points, the highest and the lowest volume levels.
Correct. So the high-low method is a way to estimate the cost equation using just 2 data points, the high and the low. Now remember, we're calling this the estimated cost line. And again, this would allow us, when we call it an estimate, it would therefore help us in projecting data points out beyond for planning purposes. So remember, if these are actual data observations that we have, reviewed or we've documented, from a planning perspective, the more valuable this line is to us and the more confident we are in this, our objective here and what we're trying to do would enter into a planning phase. Remember, if I add an additional worker, if I increase in new technology, what are some of the scenarios that I can expect? All right, so the high-low method, we're going to look at the high and low. And if you look in your presentation, you see a relationship going from, we'll use tax year, we'll use 2016, and you see the months January through December, units produced. So in January, find this slide that shows units produced 27,500. And the total cost, 21,500. You with me? February, units produced 17,500.
Oh, you're in this, okay. He's at the very top of the.
Total cost, 20,500. You with me? Okay. So here we're going to compute the variable cost per unit and the total fixed cost. Let's get started. All right, so what's the high activity level? How many units?
675 that we're on.
Correct.
Okay.
So
Right about 85.
what was the high activity in units?
67,500.
60,500.
67,500.
And when did we get that? What month?
You guys see that? I don't see it.
Where'd you get the data from?
It's in a little diagram, 18.6. On page 8 on the bottom of 804.
Okay, go back to each month and corresponding cost and production of each month. So go back to the prior slide.
The top of the page. Okay.
Correct. So let's look at January. We had 27,500.
Okay.
February, 17,500. March, 25,000.
October.
April, you're correct. In October, we had 67,500. Now, what was the total cost associated with that output?
29,000.
29,000. So this is where I have 29,000. Okay, now, what's the low activity?
February was 17,500.
In February, it was 17,500. What was the total cost associated with that output?
20,500.
20,500. All right, next we want to calculate what's the change. So what was the change from the high to the low? $50,000. And what's the change in cost? $8,500. All right, so the change in cost, so for the high-low method, we want to take a look at the total change in cost. And what we say that was, 8,500. And if we divide that by the change in units of 50,000, what do you get?
17 cents per unit.
What do you get?
17 cents. 117. per unit is what it says. One off 18.6, there's the wrong place.
17 cents per unit. Now, the total cost. How are we going to get to the total cost?
So it's fixed cost plus the variable cost per unit times units. Equals totals.
Well, the total cost is going to be equal to total fixed cost and total variable cost. Total fixed costs, remember, fixed costs do not change in relationship to output. Variable costs do react to changes in output. So we're going to have to assume some volume here when you're calculating the variable cost figure. So total cost, try to get this on the slide. Total cost is going to be equal to what?
Fixed cost plus
Fixed cost plus
variable cost.
variable cost per unit multiplied by the number of units. All right, so what is, we said our total cost was what? $29,000. We're going to solve for a variable, unknown variable here. Is equal to, do we know the fixed cost right now? No. What's the variable cost per unit? $0.17. We solved it right here. What's the number of units? Now solve that equation. And what's your total fixed cost?
11,400. Oh, divided. Fixed cost is 17,525.
Fixed cost is $17,525. You know how to solve that equation, everyone? It's going to require a little bit of, probably some free algebra, because you're solving for this one unknown variable. Remember, do what's in the parentheses first, multiply, and then solve for fixed cost. Okay, so now I'm going to move the slide over here. So we have solved for a scatter plot. We've looked at the high-low method. Now I'm going to come over here, and what's our third?
Least squares regression.
Music to my heart.
See, statistical method.
Oh, music to my heart. Me and every economist, statistician, least squares analysis. All right, now remember, we are going to give you just a slight introduction here. If you probably, this class and this lesson here would be more applied toward a more advanced accounting course. You will see it in your economics course, you'll see it in the statistics course. It's important to know too that with the use of technology, most often you will use some type of accounting or statistical software to perform this analysis for you. probably as your first introduction, you would use Microsoft Excel, which will do it. What's our objective using least squares?
Identify cost behavior.
Identify cost behaviors. So the objective remains the same as what we have found here, and that is to determine total fixed cost and variable unit cost. So we got to find total fixed cost and variable cost per unit, and knowing those two figures is going to give us total cost. Why must you know total cost? In order to maximize revenue, what must you first have? Or excuse me, maximize profit. What must you, in order to maximize profit, what must you first have? Well, you must have revenue, but you must first have a profit. And in order to have a profit, your revenue has to exceed what? Your expenses. And your expenses could be representative here of cost. So again, before you invest in that technology or before you add that additional production worker, you must ensure that output or planned output is going to be enough to cover that cost. All right, so if you will look at Exhibit 21.3, you can see an example of the least square regression. I will give you my interpretation real quick here. So we're back here to this same cost volume analysis. We're going to have some pattern that looks like this, right? Okay, now again, through the using least square analysis, remember when I used an estimate line here? Okay, using this least square analysis, it's going to give us a true linear line that will minimize. You're not going to find this in the text. You're going to see this here. Because the text just tells you what I said. Usually this is reserved for more advanced classes, but so that you know what you could get out of more advanced classes. It's going to take that estimate line and it's going to give you more accuracy. It's going to define it. It's going to make it more definite. It's going to draw a linear line, and we talk about linear, remember, a straight line. So truly straight, that will most evenly pass through all of these data points in such that it will minimize the distance between these data points. So by making it exact, it's going to go most evenly through here, where we, through these data points, to the distance of where it minimizes the distance between the line and the data points. Now, if that line is straight and it is indeed linear, we know that it's going to go on out there into, it would go forever. By knowing the slope of that line, you are going to be able to determine the cost at any point of volume. I could expand this all the way out. I could expand this all the way out to unreachable points. And again, as long as I know the slope of that line, I can chart it, and it can give me the cost at any point of activity. So just know here we're doing an estimate. When we start relying on technology, we can do a little bit better than just drawing the line up. We can do a little bit better than, that's why we rely on the technology to give us a little better output. And I think would give us a little more reliable data. Now, Again, my background of economics is going to always have me choose this method. As an introduction into this class, we are going to pay more attention to these two methods. Okay? Any questions?
I hate my timeout. Is your timeout?
Mhm.
Oh, this is irritating. Go back in. You have to pay for it. It's free. It's not.
Yeah, no, it's not, it's like $35 or something.
All right, continuing the discussion, cost, volume, profit analysis, CVP analysis. Let's move along and look at the contribution margin. All right, so what is the contribution margin? What is the contribution margin?
Is it the amount by which a product's unit selling price exceeds its total variable cost per unit?
Say that a little bit louder.
The amount by which a product's unit selling price exceeds its total variable cost per unit,
Okay, so what's it contribute to?
covering fixed costs and generating profit.
All right, so the contribution margin is going to be a product's unit selling price when it exceeds total variable cost per unit. This is the amount that is going to be used to contribute to covering fixed costs and generating profits. So we say that the contribution margin per unit is equal to what?
Selling price per unit.
Selling price per unit, I'm going to abbreviate SPU,
Minus the total variable cost
minus total variable cost
per unit.
per unit, TVCPU. And what is the contribution margin ratio?
Percent of a unit selling price that exceeds the total unit variable cost.
Okay, so the contribution margin we say is the contribution margin per unit divided by what?
Selling price per unit.
Finally found a marker that will show up. Selling price per unit. All right, so let's look at another one. Let's look at the example in the book. When the selling price per unit is $100 and the variable cost per unit is $70, what's the contribution margin per unit?
$30.
$30. Now, someone again, repeat, what is that $30? What can it be used for? Remember, it's the amount that that $30 will be used to cover fixed costs and generating profits. All right, break even. Listen up, Melissa. You asked during the break, how do we solve for break even? Break even point is expressed in units produced or dollars of sales. It is the unique sales level at which a company earns neither a profit nor incurs a loss. So at this point, we are not earning a profit, nor are we incurring a loss. So break-even point in units. How do we express that?
Fixed costs, contribution margin.
So the fixed cost divided by the contribution margin per unit. Now, when we want to express this in dollars, what's our formula?
Fixed cost divided by contribution margin ratio.
Contribution margin ratio. So fixed cost divided by the contribution margin ratio. Okay, so illustrate. Let's look at a company. Let's go all the way back and say, remember our boat? Sinking Cruises? All right, let's revisit Sinking Cruises and we'll use the numbers in the book. Okay, so selling tickets for $100. Sinking Cruises will incur $70 of variable cost per ticket sold. The fixed costs are $24,000 per month. Okay, so let's see here. They're going to sell. We're going to go over here and we'll put some variables. So what was the numbers? $100. And variable cost is 70. And we want to say fixed cost per month, 24,000.
It's kind of hard to fix some of the writing.
She can't see.
The 70 is like 70. It's like barely showing.
It's weird. I think it's the clear of the light.
Yeah.
Are you looking at my presentation in PowerPoint?
I do.
Okay, you're going to see these numbers right there. But I agree, it's,
Yeah,
if
you can see it clear there.
I move it over like this, we're getting some.
Going and all.
Let me see what this will do. It's a little bit better. Okay. Now, what is going to be, what else are we missing? Okay, if I go ahead and give you the contribution margin per unit, how can we solve for that?
Selling price minus the total rate. $100 minus.
Selling price minus total variable cost, TVC. And so the selling price was what?
100.
And the total variable cost was
70.
70. So the contribution margin per unit is $30. So you can solve that. Now, how many units, we'll call this tickets again for Sinking Cruises, how many tickets are they going to have to sell before they break even?
So if you take your fixed cost, which is 24,000, divide that by your $30.
And what's that give us?
800.
So we're going to take the fixed cost right here, and divide it by the contribution margin per unit. So total fixed cost was 24,000. And what was our contribution margin per unit? 30. We'll do it down here. So how many units must we sell? 800. So remember, the first 800 tickets sold just breaks us even. That is the amount that is used to pay for what? Our fixed cost. So we have to hit this in order to cover our fixed cost before we can even plan on anything less than this. We don't cover fixed costs. Anything less than this, we're not going to turn a profit. More than 800 tickets sold, we can start covering a profit. Okay, in dollars, how can we solve for it? And what's the contribution margin per unit?
30%.
Well, the ratio would be 30%.
Okay. Okay, I thought you were asking for in dollars.
So, what's the amount of sales per dollars that we must receive in order to break even?
80,000.
$80,000. So again, at 80,000, and since we're reporting this per month, let's go ahead and make it efficient. Per month, we must first generate $80,000 just to break even.
Can I ask what might be a really dumb question? I'm going to ask it first. So we're saying that the break-even point covers our fixed cost. Doesn't it also cover our variable cost because we've already factored that into our contribution margin? Does that make sense?
Remember, at the break-even point, yes, it's,
Okay.
it's at the point
You
where
specified fixed cost only, so but it covers costs. Like
it's going to cover. At that point, we're not incurring a loss,
right.
Nor are we generating a profit.
It's covering
But it's covered everything up to that point.
Okay. When we specified fixed costs earlier, I wanted to make sure I wasn't like missing something.
I always pinpoint fixed costs to start out with because remember, those are the costs that we must first satisfy right out of the gate. With no activity, we're still going to incur fixed costs.
Okay.
All right, good question though. Good clarification. All right, now let's look at CV chart. And let's explain what's going on in that chart. All right, so flip over to the slide that says preparing a CVP chart. Take a look here. Let that board dry for a minute. Okay, so back to our old chart. And again, in taking an econ class, you will definitely have no problem. You'll get accustomed to seeing these charts.
I wonder if you set it on something that could help with cutting out the glare. Yeah, that was one that you set it on something that could.
Darkest marker that we have. I think they're all about the same. Looks a little better. All right, remember at this point, we're always at 0. And we're going to use line like this. We're going to call that sales. Call that dollars volume. And one way of representing this is if we want to track our cost, we're going to call this our cost. Now let me ask, why would I start my sales at 0? Why didn't I start my cost at 0?
Because you're never going to have a sale without cost. Right?
Well, look, my sales dollars are starting at 0.
Because you've already determined the cost.
So the what?
I said you've already determined the cost.
What kind of cost?
The fixed.
Good point. This area here is going to represent my fixed cost. Because remember, before I even sell one item, I'm incurring these costs. Okay, where's my break even? At the intersection. So at this point, remember, I'm not earning a profit, nor am I incurring a loss. Okay, my loss area is where? So here, we are incurring a loss. Where's my profit area? Here. So in this area, we'll call this the profit. And this is going to represent total cost. But remember, just this little portion right here is going to represent fixed cost. So real quick, how could I solve for variable? There's something I'll add. What would total cost be equal to? Fixed cost plus variable cost. So remember, if you wanted to solve for variable cost, you could take the total cost, which you would know here, minus the fixed cost. And And that would give you your variable cost. Okay. Move over a few slides and you're going to see computing income from sales and cost.
Can you move the screen over a little bit? Thank you.
Okay, computing sales for a target income. How are we going to solve for that? So here you go. Now you're trying to have, you're in the planning phase and you've set a target income that you're going to strive for. Here's what you're planning, that target income. How much sales are you going to have to generate in order to hit that target income? And going back to the prior example, we had total fixed cost of $24,000. We had a contribution margin ratio of 30%.
I'm sorry, I'm so old.
There you go.
I'm sorry. Look at my.
All right, so if I have a planned target income, so back to that example, we had fixed cost, what I say, 24,000. This is going back to the other example, and the contribution margin ratio was 30%. Okay, what if I have a target income of 12,000? What sales am I going to have to generate in order to hit my target ratio? All right, find the slide. It's going to be your fixed cost plus target income divided by the contribution margin ratio. So fixed cost plus the target income. We assign 12,000 to that, divided by contribution margin ratio of 30%. What's that going to be equal to? 120,000. And most often, in practice, this is going to be a scenario you'll be faced with. You're going to know what do I need to earn in order to hit my objective? What number is this? What sales number has just been assigned to me? Now, obviously, you know you're going to have to go above and beyond that in order to cover your cost. Unit sales at a target income. Replace this ratio with the contribution margin per unit instead of the contribution margin ratio. So just substitute the denominator here for the contribution margin per unit. All right, flip over to, I think we're getting close to the end here. Let's look at sensitivity analysis. This is slide 44.
We don't know that. Page 13.
Yeah, it's the next page, yeah.
Where do you see slides in the books? Do you
He sends her a PowerPoint.
Oh.
Yeah.
I sent you a PowerPoint.
Melissa, don't you?
You all have the same PowerPoints.
Swear.
Up in-
Honest to goodness, swear.
If you go to the textbook publisher, these PowerPoints are right there for you.
I'm just being aware of this. So it's e-text?
So if you will go to
Like you keep saying that, I'm sorry, in every class I'm like, I have no clue.
Yeah. After I conclude this, I'll show you
Okay.
where to,
Just
where to
I'd love
go.
to be able to follow along.
All right, so sensitivity analysis. Can you find it in your text?
Yes, page 813.
Page what?
813.
813. All right, what's sensitivity analysis?
To use it to predict income.
Used to predict income.
Describe how these changes affect the company's fixed costs, variable costs, selling price, and volume.
As it relates to what?
Planning business strategies.
Planning business strategies, changes in
Fixed costs. Devise break-even points.
all right, sensitivity analysis. You want to see how sensitive these items are to changes in cost. Okay, so when you think of any sensitivity analysis, you know, you want to look at, from a planning phase, what would be some expected changes, even from seasonal products to what if there was a ban on our product, what if sales just plummeted, what if new legislation scrapped? I mean, anything that you might view as responsible for changing in these variables. How can you plan, or how can you plan for these changes? All right, the global view. Let's twist this up on the international standard. We're going to end on, so let's look at a worldwide view. Know that 90% of companies, what? 90% of companies will.
Their system is focused on contribution margin.
90%, right here, book says 90% of companies, German companies surveyed, report their cost accounting systems focusing on contribution margin. And I think you'll find more and more companies focused on that contribution margin. Because always remember, that's the amount of money you've got to run the organization or expand the organization. But first satisfying the fixed costs, then your ability to earn a profit. And as you move up into management, you can bet that's going to be one of the emphasis that could be placed on you, is your ability to maintain and grow a profit. All right, what do I mean by leverage? As it applies to finance. Operating leverage.
Measurement of the degree to which a firm or project incurs a combination of fixed and variable costs.
They measured of the extent to which fixed costs are being used in an organization. The degree of operating leverage is a measure of how a percentage change in sales will affect profit. So remember, we're talking about operating leverage, a measure of the extent to which fixed costs are being used to run an organization. How do we define and solve for the degree of operating leverage? The total contribution margin in dollars divided by any pre-tax income. So back to our example, using our prior numbers. $36,000 divided by 12,000 is equal to 3. So what's that 3 going to tell me?
Sales of pre-tax income.
If we know that this degree of leverage is 3, if our cruise line, Sinking Cruises, if Sinking Cruises increases sales by 10%, what will be the percentage increase in income?
30%.
30%. And how am I getting 30%?
Well, that times the 2% increase.
So change in income is equal to
DOL.
the degree of operating, not to be confused with the Department of Labor, the degree of operating leverage
Times the
multiplied by the change in a percentage. So solve for this at 3. And what was the change percentage? We simply experienced a 10% change, so 30%. So if the cruise line experienced a 10% increase in sales, that would represent a 30% increase in income. Like I said, when I show you these slides real quick, if you look at my last slide, it's going to give you an introduction to estimated linear square, a regression line using Excel. So just be sure you reference that. Any questions before I conclude the presentation? Look panicked. You're 3. Okay.
Yeah, okay.